Control theories are another way of utilizing the constructionist explanation for trying to explain or describe sport deviant and violent behavior. The basic assumptions for all control theories are pretty simple. 1. Human behavior must be regulated and it must be held in check. The second one is that because of societal pressure, deviant behavior should be expected and ultimately it should be planned for because it's going to be universal and constant. And thirdly, the tendency to commit deviant behavior, as we've said, everyone's going to do it. So, if it's universal, we need to understand a little bit more about it and try to put controls in place to limit the type of impact. As you can see, there are going to be two basic control systems. You have much more of a personal and a social control system. The personal control system is much more psychologically based and it's much more individualistic. Hence the reason I talked about things like ego, self-esteem, that type of thing. The social system, for trying to be involved in terms of controlling behavior, involves social institutions. Institution of family, education, religion, also for our purposes, the institution of sport. According to the general control theory, which has the two systems, personal and social, when these control systems fail or become defective, they're not really going to be sufficient enough to constrain or regulate human behavior like we need it to be regulated. Let's dive a little bit more into the personal control system. And Walter Reckless is kind of one of the more well-known people for talking about a personal control system with his what he called containment theory. It's very similar to differential association. It tends to be a little bit more focused on the individual, however. And it does that by stating that deviance is a result of a poor self-concept. A positive view of oneself tends to insulate or protect a person from the susceptibility or the draw of engaging in deviant behavior. If you feel good about yourself, you're able to ward off temptation, as it were. People have multifaceted images of themselves and identities. And so there's going to be a lot of different drives, a lot of different pulls, and so therefore you need to have a lot of different insulators to buffer against all these different pulls and temptations. For him, increasing the idea of self-concept was by far the most effective buffer to keeping people out of deviant behavior. And this is sort of interesting because it kind of harkens back to that functionalist notion of sport participation that we talked about in the last section. We know that functionalism was talking about participation in sport as having a positive integrative function. So let's focus in using kind of containment theory on a much more individualistic level. And we say that maybe being involved in sports keeps people out of trouble. The old adage is that idle hands are the devil's workshop, right? So many years ago, Denzel Washington and the Boys and Girls Club engaged in this promotional partnership that was really focused on this idea, and it's a real life statistic, but 80% of juvenile delinquency occurs between 3 o'clock in the afternoon and 8 o'clock in the evening. And for a lot of people, that's unsupervised time after school, for example. And so the Boys and Girls Club or organized sport participation programs are great ways to not only take up that time and keep them out of trouble, but also ultimately build a better self-concept. You have an increase in self-esteem and how you view yourself, which would, from the containment theory point of view, inhibit engaging in deviant behavior. Now, that other control system is the social control system. And Travis Hershey, in the late 60s, early 70s, and yes, that is how to pronounce his name, is Hershey, even though it's spelled differently than the chocolates. But Hershey developed the social bond theory. All right, and it's kind of unique. It focuses on the individual and the society, or a community and culture, and how all those things come together. And it says strong social bonds and attachment to traditional institutional arrangements is a stronger inhibitive force in regards to deviant behavior. So schools, sport programs, things like that, Boys and Girls Clubs, those types of organizations and institutions help keep the individual out of trouble. The thing that was also kind of interesting about Hershey's social bond theory is that it focused more on why we do not deviate from the norm. Okay, so it's more about integration than deviance. And it said that the social bond for the individual is composed of four interrelated parts. You have attachment to others, involvement in society's conventional activities, a true-on commitment to other people, and a belief in society or culture's values, like an actual internalized belief that these ideas are important and worth striving for. So let's kind of examine some of those aspects of the social bond and how sport or sport participation can be associated with it. First, we have attachment, and this is about the investment in the team. The more you put in, the stronger your bond will be to your teammates, your coach, and potentially, if we're talking about school-sponsored sports, maybe your investment and your attachment will be stronger to the school. Commitment. Let's look at kind of a cost-benefit analysis. How committed you are to things. Are you taking care of quote-unquote business in the classroom? Are you maintaining the GPA that's required for you to participate in school-sponsored sports? If you are, and the only reason that you are maintaining that GPA is because of your commitment to your team, then that's one way that a sport program forces you to do something better and avoid deviant behavior. And that's sort of borne out from the commitment you have to your team. What about involvement? Well, involvement was talking about being involved in conventional activities within a culture or society. And sport in a lot of different communities, in a lot of different places, is a conventional integrative activity. So the fact that you're involved in sports is a positive thing. And then finally, we know that sports here in American culture are predicated upon and tend to disseminate the middle class values of American culture. Hard work, motivation, discipline, all these different things that are so important to the beginning and the development of what we kind of call American culture. And if you believe and accept those values in sports, then it helps you to understand and believe in those values in a larger social context outside of sports. Final word. When we're talking about control theories, whether you're talking about containment in more of an individualistic point of view, or you're talking about social bond in much more of a sociological point of view, they've actually received a decent amount of empirical support over the years. They're very useful for identifying, understanding, and examining deviant behavior in certain contexts. They do not, however, as with a lot of these different theories, they do not explain all the deviant behavior and the different forms that it can take. And so one of the things you're probably starting to see is that limitation is very common and prominent with a lot of these theories, and that's kind of leading us down this path of theory integration, is that you're going to combine a couple of these different theories to help explain things that are going on in regards to understanding deviant behavior within the world of sport, recreation, and physical activity.